Guys, thank you for watching. I want to kind of have a bit of a rant slash discussion, and would appreciate comments and feedback a little bit on how you see a situation. But there's this whole thing about the NES failing in the UK and to a lesser extent Europe. And I think this information is a little bit based on numbers without looking into the situation more. And this information often gets told from YouTubers and stuff who weren't necessarily the right age, or were either, a little bit before or a little bit after. They just look at figures, they don't really look at the bigger picture. And I'm going to discuss why I don't see that as being the point. So basically, guys, if you ever watch my videos, you know, big Nintendo fan. It's what brought me really into gaming. And I've written a few notes of stuff I wanted to cover here, so there might be a few jumps in this video, and that's fine. Basically, my step into Nintendo was in 1991, and that would be, in theory, sort of the later end of the NES life cycle. So, as a 6 or 7 year old at the time, and I visited my friend Tim, and he had this very cartridge. He had a Nintendo, and I was blown away by it. Super Mario Brothers. Didn't even try Tetris and Nintendo World Cup. I didn't even realise they were on there at the time. Super Mario Bros. We would literally play that all night. I probably didn't even get past level 1, 2, but I just kept playing and loved it. It was just magical to me, and I actually remember that day. This is 26 years ago, and I remember just playing it, and it's crazy that that day will stay with me for life, and it sounds ridiculous, but it's true. And so that threw me straight into the love of Nintendo at the age of 6 or 7. I'm not sure what time of year it was to make that judgment. That's the whole point. This was 1991. This was on the cusp of the SNES being released in Europe. The SNES already about released in the US and already been released in Japan. Mega Drive was out. And this is why I think, people in the UK in the 80s were all about the home computers and the Commodore 64, Atari ST, ZX Spectrum. That was the gaming industry in the UK. I don't think the Atari 2600 had a particularly big following here. We'll get into that with me shortly, because that was another big console for me. But from reports it reads like the NES came out in the UK in 1987. At that point I was too young to understand stuff. I was born in 1984. I didn't really play computer games properly until the like I say, 1990, 91. 91. People say that, Nintendo couldn't get a stranglehold in the UK market because expense. A cartridge would in theory cost 40, 50 quid. 30, 40, 50 quid. It's a lot of money when, your Spectrum and your Commodore and Amiga games and stuff were all a hell of a lot cheaper and easy to copy, and people would pick up the titles for next to nothing. So the NES, and to a lesser extent the Master System, was a luxury item for people. But I see it as, in 1991, as a kid, all my friends I knew were playing the Master System or the NES. There wasn't anyone playing anything else. Not initially, anyway. So my generation, which seems to be a forgotten generation, could afford to play the NES because of the second-hand market. And that's another point of mine. Nintendo may have only sold... This is hard for me to find out exactly how many units of the NES console was sold, but most people I know, except for my friend Tim actually, bought an NES pre-owned, second-hand. And I don't think people take into account that the NES maybe sold, 2 million possibly in the UK at most, maybe between the years of 87 and 90. And then my generation came along and them same units were then flogged on to me and my friends as, you know, budget consoles that we wanted to play. And that's where the legacy of the NES comes in. And I feel that, yes, sales, numbers, and money that Nintendo made wasn't brilliant, but the second-hand market for the NES blew up in the early 90s, and I'm saying that as a statement. And anyone who doesn't believe that wasn't living through it at the right time, doesn't believe it true. Yes, the SNES, the 16-bit era consoles dominated, that is true, but the NES and the Master System were a big part of childhood for me and my friends. You know, most people I knew wanted to play them at that age. That was a big thing for them to do. And it must show in the whole merchandising thing, because, you know, people would say the NES was a failure, but way before the SNES, you know, before the SNES came in, Mario was huge over here. Super Mario was everything, you know. They had a cartoon, they had merchandise, they had, you know, stuff in Happy Meals and that. And it's like, why would you do that if Nintendo didn't have that following, you know? Mario was all about the games, and then, you know, the merchandise and stuff must have played on that. There's so much talk about Super Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog back in 91, 92 time, that you can't deny that the NES was popular in this country. And I'm going to bring it back to this pre-owned thing, because people say about the pricing of the games, it was ridiculous at full price. But as a kid, out of the dozen NES games, maybe 15 NES games I owned over the life of me owning that console, probably 2 or 3 of them were new releases, as in new copies of games that were bought. And that's obviously not my money, because I had, you know, £1 a week pocket money or something like that back then, which in today's terms probably doesn't sound a lot, but it did me for my sweets and Beano and whatnot. So, but yeah, but I could go to the Cavern, which was this second-hand store in my town. It was basically, they'd sell anything, and pretty much all NES games were £5 each. So it's hard for me to do the maths of when I actually picked up an NES. I was religiously round my friend Tim's house, who got his NES in 91, because I had to do research of when this triple pack got released to figure out when we were first playing it. But so yeah, I was religiously playing it around his. But at this, you know, so I wanted my console on my own, and obviously, you know, my parents, you know, didn't have a lot of money to spend, you know. So we bought an Atari 2600, brand new. Probably would have been Christmas 91, possibly my birthday 92, but I believe it was the Christmas of 91. Bought the 2600 out the Littlewoods catalogue. I think it was $29.99. It came with 32 games in one, and built in a cartridge, which are all a lot of good games on that. So for a 7-year-old, that was a great entry-level console for me, and it wasn't so much about graphics. I could tell the difference that the Atari wasn't as good looking as the NES. But what sold it to me, and again, this is my thing about Nintendo being more popular than you think, is that one of the standout games that they were advertising that you could buy as an extra was the Mario Brothers, the arcade port for the Atari. So it's obviously, you know, marketing-wise, they're like, okay, you know, Mario's got big, Nintendo's got big, how can we push it to 2600? Oh, we'll chuck, you know, we're going to sell this Mario Brothers game, so that's going to, you know, it's them on the cover, it's clearly there, even though the design's slightly different. That's how we're going to push this console to the younger gamers, hence myself. And I love my Atari, you know, simple games, didn't need instructions for it, you'd figure them out pretty easy, you know, one button and joystick. There's only so many combinations of things you need to learn. I love my Atari, and that did me well for sort of a couple of years, I'd say. I would think I finally picked up a pre-owned NES myself after religiously playing my friends in maybe at least another year after that. It was probably Christmas 92, and then by then, yeah, the SNES is around, and I'll keep jumping my story here, but we could pick up NES games for £5 each, you know, which still would be every few months for me for picking up a new game, but we didn't care back then, because you'd buy a game, and even if it wasn't brilliant, you just play the hell out of it, because you know you weren't getting anything else for a while. So again, it comes down to the popularity is not down to the number of sales, it's down to the fact that my generation picked up this console slightly after its peak, definitely after its worldwide peak, but we could you know, as kids, play these games that look beautiful to us, bona fide classics, and shops would, you know, pre-owned shops would sell these for, you know, £5 each, and they wouldn't care. It's not like retro gaming collecting now, where that title's a good title, we're going to sell that for more. Everything was just £5. Didn't matter what it was. I got the game Kick-Off, the football game, the soccer game, with my NES, just out of persuasion from a friend of mine who was there when I bought the console. I wasn't particularly into football at the time. Love it now, obviously. But yeah, slowly picked up the games I knew my friend used to know and love, and just risk. You took a risk then. You just buy a game. It weren't like Googling it now. You took a risk and bought a game, and 9 times out of 10 I'd enjoy the game I picked up. So it didn't take too long, you know, Christmas and birthdays, be able to get a decent collection at the time. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the whole thing. I'm not sure if there's anything else I need to say, but yeah, like well into the I'd say up to around 94, 95 possibly even, that the NES was still, the games are still stocked in shops like Beatties, you know, which is a big toy chain for us. I'm not sure if it was a nationwide thing, but I remember there being, you know, a store in my town and then one in Leicester, and they were a big toy store. They would sell new games for NES. Well, I'd say at least up to 94, you know, and one new physical copy of a game I got was for Christmas from my uncle, was Darkwing Duck on the NES, which I think was a 92 release. I'm not sure when it came out in the UK. But by then the games, even physical new sealed games, were probably going for sort of 15 to 20 quid, you know. So that comes back to the whole, you know, I think some games were probably even like a tenner, you know. It comes back to the thing that not all of them were 40, 50 pounds, you know. They probably were when they first came out in the late 80s, and that's why it did struggle. But that secondary generation of picking up the NES, where you could still find the games all over, either pre-owned or brand new, got the better deal of it, you know. So I had my NES, you know, it broke on me around the mid-90s, so, but at the time I was fine. I'd moved on to the SNES and then the PS1 eventually. I rebought the console in 2004, a boxed NES console action set with the Zapper and Duck Hunt and Mario, for $29.99, which obviously 2004 really was prior to the big retro boom of the late noughties, so I picked it up at a good time, and that's the current console I still have. And the box version that still had the Woolworths price sticker on of $99.99. So, you know, the console was well priced at the time for people to pick up, and obviously the games, you know, they were still pricey at some places, but you could go through that second-hand market or the budget, you know, later releases. And that's where I'm sticking to my thought that the NES was vastly popular in the UK. People say the Master System was a hell of a lot more popular. I'm guessing sales proved that. But I always found with my friends it was 50-50 whether they had one or the other. Whether there was the Sega kid or the Nintendo kid. It wasn't, you know, 2-to-1, 3-to-1 Sega. It was more 50-50, and that's got lucky for me, because then I could swap my NES with my, you know, trade for a little while. We'd borrow each other's consoles and play the games that way. Another thing is, like, you know, the NES Classic Mini was ridiculously popular in the UK as well, so much that it's impossible to find the same way it was worldwide. So I think Nintendo forget about that market, the pre-owned market, and the latter market of NES buyers. You know, the fact that they release stuff like the Classic Mini and then mass-produced the book to get released, just shows that the fans are out there. The numbers don't add up, but it was a popular system, and it'd be ridiculous it annoys me sometimes when YouTubers will be stating that it wasn't, or it died here, or you know, it's when they talk to their American counterparts. In comparison, yes, but I don't think they you know, these are the YouTubers that didn't live through it, you know, they didn't live through that era of when the NES was still playgroundly popular, you know, it was popular in the homes. There's probably the slightly older generation, you know, the teenagers who were well moved on from this and just missed it out completely. They went from their Commodore 64s and their Spectrums directly to the Mega Drive or the Super Nintendo. But there was this group, probably just that 2 or 3 year gap of kids who religiously played on this and the Master System. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. This was quite ranty, and it probably would have been good to be able to discuss this with someone on camera or in a podcast or something, but I might be doing something down the podcast route soon. I'm going to keep you posted on that. But thank you guys for watching. Please leave your comments on this, because I'm intrigued to see, you know, I'm 33 years old, so if you're a similar age to me, how you perceived this back in the early 90s, or if you're not my age and you're going off what you hear elsewhere, why you think I'm wrong, or if you're just interested in what I had to say. So guys, thank you for watching. I'm back to watching football now, so all's good, and we'll catch you again soon.